Webinar series. My name is Tom Mariola, and I'm a senior planner with the Municipal Planning Assistance Program at MOCA. These monthly webinars are intended for those that are new to the planning profession. A reminder that these sessions are recorded and posted to our website. I will post a link to that page shortly. Actually, I already posted it. There's 3 links in the right-hand column in the chat. Jumping ahead. So the first one is to size handbook that we'll be talking about today. The second one is North Star Planning's website. Ben Smith will just be joining us. The third one is what I just mentioned. That's where all these recordings go. Okay, and has the schedule for future workshops, future sessions. Our next session will be Friday, April 3rd. As I've been doing lately, I don't have a topic yet, but please send along any topics you can recommend. So far, there are 3 sort of on the people have sent me that we're sort of, if someone kind of gives it a second, we'll just jump on it probably. We still have abandoned and discontinued roads has been floating out there. Presentation on farm viability solutions for municipal planning. So agricultural planning. And then the other one was a presentation on art and economic development. So the last 2, especially probably agriculture, in my opinion, seems like could be a big one. But sometimes I'll get questions about, well, how do you plan for ag? And I always just kind of kick it off to someone else. So I have a lot to learn there. Today we welcome Cy Coffey. Cy is a U.S. Department of Energy Fellow hosted by the Maine Department of Energy Resources. During his fellowship, Cy has supported various projects focused on helping communities to understand and access clean energy technology. Like I said, I also just learned that Ben Smith will also be presenting or assisting Cy. Ben Smith created North Star Planning in 2017 to help communities create and sustain the places that make your community a special place to live, work, and play. North Star is one of Maine's premier planning consultants, offering a variety of services from comprehensive plans, open space plans, downtown plans, as well as municipal assistance through land use ordinances work and planning board support. And Cy and Ben, thank you for joining us, and you can go ahead and begin.
Great, thanks, Tom. Thanks for having us here today. I think this is really exciting for us because this audience is the exact folks that we had in mind when we were putting this handbook together. We really designed it to hopefully be useful for municipal and kind of planning staff. And so I think we're really excited to be able to share more about it today. Just as a really brief agenda, I think Tom mentioned this is kind of an informal group, so we're going to keep it relatively informal.
And Cy, and I did tell you I was going to tell him. So it's probably going to be a shorter session today. So it'll be an easier Friday. I think you said something around 40 minutes or so, maybe a little bit more with questions and all. But so just so folks can kind of plan their afternoon. Thanks.
Yeah, hopefully give everyone a couple of minutes back on this Friday. Just as a brief agenda, I'm going to cover a little bit of background on the Department of Energy Resources and kind of the handbook itself and why we went through this process. Ben with North Star is going to give you a more in-depth presentation on the handbook itself, covering some more of the technical planning related details that is where my expertise in this kind of wanes, and so he's going to pick up there. And then I think we really want to have a pretty robust discussion and really want to leave a lot of time for Q&A and to kind of talk through this resource and how it can hopefully be helpful for y'all in your communities. So just really quickly, some really brief background. The Maine Department of Energy Resources until last year was the Maine Governor's Energy Office. We were elevated to a cabinet level department and established in September of last year. We're the state energy office. Every state has a state energy office, and we're kind of tasked with a wide range of activities related to energy policies, planning, and development. We coordinate with a lot of partners across the state, including Efficiency Maine Trust, the Community Resilience Partnership, and others, and kind of engage and support communities where we can on energy related topics. This handbook was really born out of the kind of a response to a lack of resources for communities and kind of clarity for developers. And in 2019, when solar development really started to accelerate within the state, there was, I think, a kind of lack of a standard approach to planning for solar, and kind of given the amount of development that was incited with some favorable state policies and federal tax credits, that kind of led to a very complex patchwork of local regulations and some municipal moratoria on solar. And so I think through conversations that we facilitated or participated in, we kind of learned and felt like there was a space to improve on understanding and hopefully provide some tools and resources to communities to think about solar and storage projects, kind of within their jurisdiction. And so our goal with this handbook is we wanted to develop a narrative resource to provide a lot of background and kind of enhance understanding of solar and storage, and then provide some tools, including some model ordinance language to support municipalities in managing these projects. I think I also briefly want to mention that there are some related initiatives moving forward that DOER has that I think are really relevant to this handbook. Part of our elevation to a cabinet level department, we now have Clean Energy Procurement Authority, and we expect to release a battery energy storage RFP in the coming months. And really think that the timing of this handbook and that RFP, there's a lot of good synchronicities there. And as there's potentially some increased interest in battery energy storage as a technology, we hope that these tools and resources can help communities proactively plan for that RFP moving forward. And then LD 1777, which passed last session, as net energy billing faded out last year for projects greater than 1 megawatt in size, DOER is tasked with developing a follow-on front-of-the-meter distributed generation program. We've brought in some consultants to support with that, and expect to have some drafts for public comment over the coming months there. And then I think I always just like to introduce this kind of in the context of our state energy goals and the overall landscape. And as we're seeing, and as the DOER released in a report produced by the Brattle Group earlier this year, Maine's reliance on foreign fossil fuels really leads to volatility and price spikes within Maine's electricity and energy markets. And I think we're seeing that now with LNG prices and fuel prices increasing due to war in the Middle East, and in solar and storage and clean energy is really seen as a long-term way to mitigate some of those price spikes. And so with all of that in mind, last year we contracted with North Star Planning and Vero Law to start to put together this handbook resource. We really wanted to prioritize engagement throughout the process and worked with a variety of state level entities, municipalities, RPOs, developers, and kind of MREA on the developer side, and then some environmental nonprofits, really trying to get the full range of those impacted by solar and storage projects to be able to provide some input and help us kind of guide the development of this resource and these ordinances. I'm going to provide a little bit of background on a couple of the sections, some things that I wanted to highlight, and then really turn it over to Ben for the bulk of it. But I think why we think about solar and storage is because solar that has been the most prevalent clean energy resource developed in the state, with over 1,500 megawatts installed. And when you combine solar and storage, you really see some robust benefits of being able to unlock and store this solar that is generated during the middle of the day, and then you can kind of with batteries save that and use it later on when the sun is no longer shining, and that really provides some additional resilience, grid, and cost benefits, both at the kind of local scale and at the grid scale. And then I think also as storage and battery energy storage has increased in its development, there have been some associated kind of safety and other concerns. And just with any new technology, there are some questions around how it will impact the communities in which it is sited. And so a real goal of this was to proactively try to answer and provide some clarity on what exactly the technology is and what some of the impacts might be. So just a couple of things that I wanted to highlight. I wanted to first celebrate some of the communities that worked with us on this project. We included some case studies within the handbook, and I just want to thank Rumford, South Portland, Topsom, and Gorham, who provided us with some information on projects that they have cited within their communities, some of the permitting requirements that they included, any ordinance language or other ways in which they have considered land use planning priorities when citing these projects. And the goal of these case studies is to really demystify what projects look like at different sizes, what the requirements are, and hopefully connect folks with other communities that have gone through the process so that they can think about how to learn from best practices across the state. The other part that I want to highlight from the handbook is Vero Law put together a kind of comprehensive resource of the state and federal regulations for solar and storage permitting that exist. And I think a real benefit that we see from this is to allow for municipalities to understand what is already being regulated, exactly how those regulations are applied within the state. And then it allows communities to see what gaps there are in their needs as a community, to kind of reduce redundancies and ensure that the community's priorities are what are being promoted and kind of included within some land use considerations. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ben. And once again, thank Tom and everyone for being here, and hope to answer some questions and participate in a discussion once Ben provides a more robust overview of the handbook.
Cool. Thank you very much, Sai. I think I wanted to just preface the 15 minutes or so, 10 minutes or so that I'm going to go through some slides with a couple questions. One is maybe by show of hands, virtually or on the camera. How many of you live in a community that has a large solar farm installed somewhere in town? So
sounds like a trick question, right? I think everyone probably does. Is that the trick?
Yeah. How many of you live in a town that has a battery energy storage facility installed? So I think one of the things that we learned and really kind of came to light through this work is and a question, frankly, from folks who asked is like, why are you writing this handbook now? Like, the horse is out of the barn. Like, there's solar everywhere. Why are we doing this? And I think number one, my first answer to that is that the horse is not out of the barn. I think that the first wave of solar development in the state is wrapping up based on the programs that Sai had mentioned. But we have reviewed some very large solar farms for communities that involved battery energy storage and new substations and hundreds of acres of land that are receiving no state subsidies. These are market rate projects that are being built at a large scale, or at least proposed at this stage. And I think that there will be more of those in the future. And the second response to that is battery energy storage is really an emerging land use in Maine. There's a few examples that we point to in the handbook, but I think there's going to be many more of these instances around the state, and it'd be good for communities to start to get a handle on these uses, maybe before they come to town, thinking about what the implications might be for your community. So with that being said, maybe I'll jump right into the next few slides. I don't know, Sai, if you can help out with the slide sharing, that'd be great. This is an overview of what we'd like to cover, just a bit about the handbook itself, and we'll talk about the model ordinance. So, Tom, did you want to break in?
Yep, Ben. Before you move too far, Jim, is your hand up because you have a battery in your town, or is there a question? I oh, I don't know. Okay, that's fine. I don't know, Jim Fisher. I don't know if you can hear. Your hands up. Feel free to jump in at any point. Go ahead, Ben.
Next slide, please, Sai. Thank you very much. So, the handbook includes a lot of information, covers a lot of ground, but in a nutshell, it's meant to provide an overview of what these technologies are and suggest some local considerations that are going to be important as you think about the future of these land uses in your community. It also suggests some reasonable local protections within a permissive framework. And what we mean by that is we're working from the standpoint that in order to meet state goals around clean energy, these kinds of facilities, solar and battery energy storage, are going to be more and more common on the Maine landscape. And thinking about what kind of local considerations in particular are going to be important. Sai had mentioned, and I won't talk too much about it, but the federal and state requirements and regulations and the entities that are involved in permitting these things at state and local levels. And we'll focus today more on local issues. And finally, it's a reference document, technical resource that we hope folks will, kind of keep going back to over the years. Next, please. So quick overview. There's 4 parts. It includes these things I just talked about, as well as the model ordinances and a pretty exhaustive list of the current state of federal and state land use laws and regulations. So we'll jump right into part 1 of the handbook. It's really about these 2 pieces, these 2 technologies. One is solar energy itself. I think everybody understands, these kinds of large scale principal use grid connected systems. That's the focus of this handbook. And we'll talk more about the difference between a principal use and an accessory use. But we're really talking with this handbook about principal use, where the main use on the property is going to be energy generation in this case. There's technical information in the handbook about how they work, a little bit about the technology and the current capacity, as well as those case studies that Sai had mentioned. Next, please. And the other side is battery energy storage. So again, focusing on large grid connected systems. We're not talking about solar panels on your neighbor's garage, and we're not talking about someone's, Tesla wall battery system kind of energy backup for an individual home. We're talking about the kind of project you see on the screen right now is a rendering of the now completed facility in Gorham with grid scale energy storage. So again, a little bit about what they are, how they work, a few system profiles. Next, please. And this is, I think, where it gets a little bit out of the book report kind of mode and into some information that planners and planning volunteers can really grab onto here. Trying to understand what are developers looking for when it comes to the development of either solar energy systems or battery energy storage. There's different considerations, different sites that'll be more attractive than others. And we get into that a little bit. I think everyone can imagine, the ideal solar farm site is going to be a large, flat, already cleared, your prototypical hayfield that will be easy for someone to access. And there are also things along those lines that developers will be looking for around energy storage. So access to power, access to substations, roadways, and so forth. So as you start these conversations in a community about what are these things, where might they be appropriate in town, it'll help shape, are there places in your community that are more likely to see these kinds of things than others, just based on some of these considerations. The other part of this is trying to present some information that we have heard in actual planning board public hearing situations, questions that people have about these things, as well as research around other processes, questions that people have that might not be based on a full understanding of what these things are. Some of the examples in the book are about, 5G and electromagnetic interference and, the impact on wildlife, property values, those kinds of things. So we do cite studies, and we do cite some research that'll help kind of give everyone, hopefully, at an early stage in the conversation, a common set of knowledge and facts to work from as you start to have these conversations in your town. Next, please. I'll just give a very light touch on this for today's purposes. But as we had mentioned, this handbook is also taking place in the context of trying to provide some locally relevant and local issues in the context of state and federal regulations. So we give an overview of what those are. We want people to understand who is going to be looking at these projects and what the requirements are, and for informational purposes, but also to give towns a sense of, what are the kinds of things that you may not need to be as concerned about at a local level, understanding that there are going to be state and federal requirements as well. A good example of that is around decommissioning and performance bonds. Early on, like way back in, 8 years ago, 7 years ago, it was up to every town to kind of be in charge of their own performance bond, decommissioning bond process. But DEP has since standardized this across the state so that it's less important for communities to manage that piece of it, knowing that there's going to be state requirements along those lines. And there are other things like that as well. So next, please. We can come back to any of these if people have specific questions, but this is more where I wanted to get to some of the local considerations. As I think most people in this meeting understand, Maine communities have got a lot of discretion on how they look at these land uses, just like you would with any land use in your community. And Sai gave a little bit of a preview at the beginning that that discretion was fully exercised. There are many communities around the state. I don't think we have a full inventory of how many communities actually have either a standalone solar energy ordinance or use-based solar farm standards somewhere in their zoning or land use ordinances. And some of them are very permissive, and some are regulating from a standpoint of these are only going to be allowed in very specific situations under these kinds of circumstances. So our hope is that this handbook can kind of maybe reset the field a little bit with knowledge and with some model ordinances to help people provide some consistency based on what's relevant at a local level. So I kind of teased this conversation about principal versus accessory uses. These are a couple accessory uses. The first is these solar canopies over some windows at a bank. That is not the main use of the property. The principal use is a bank, and it happens to have some solar panels. The picture at the bottom is a solar array for an off-grid house, and that is not the principal use. It's supporting the residential use. So again, we're thinking and suggesting in the handbook that those types of accessory uses can just go through your normal code enforcement process as part of a building permit. The principal uses, solar energy systems as we define them, the big solar farms and battery energy storage systems would go through a planning board process. So we try and help kind of lay out what are the impacts of these things and who or what needs protection from those impacts. So if we go to the next slide, Si, there's a number of ways to get to that, and these are the building blocks of most local regulation is kind of where are these things going to be allowed and how are they going to be allowed, and zoning is the where, and generally site plan is the how. And for communities that don't have zoning, those performance standards are going to be very important. Because essentially, if a project can meet the standards, they theoretically would be allowed anywhere in town. Zoning gets to that conversation of what are the different land use contexts in our community? Is this compatible with this neighborhood? Is this compatible with this rural economy, for example? I think in general, what we found is that solar energy systems and battery energy storage systems are generally quite compatible with a wide range of neighboring land uses. Solar in particular is something that we see mixed in with residential development around the state. We see it in near roads and commercial areas. We see it in very rural areas. I think that the caveat to this is that neither of these are going to be really very compatible with downtown land use context. If you're trying to reinvigorate your downtown or establish a mixed use neighborhood or support an existing mixed use neighborhood, you're probably not going to want to allow these land uses in that context. But otherwise, they do seem to be very compatible with locating in a wide range of areas. So the how part of it is can be quite general, as in a site plan review, thinking about how site plan works as far as the normal environmental, traffic, water and septic kind of considerations. And those site plan standards will apply across your community. Another approach is to think about use-specific performance standards, and those would apply to a use in addition to the normal site plan standards. You may have specific concerns, and we do suggest some specific performance standards, particularly around how communities think about decommissioning, emergency response, buffers and screening, and site access for these uses. So if you wouldn't mind, Si, the next one. This kind of is the bridge into the fourth part of the handbook, which is the model ordinance themselves. And what we suggest is that this is a starting point for how you may regulate these in your community. They are use-based standards, and these ordinances can work if you have zoning or if you do not have zoning. They will work if you have a very robust zoning or land use ordinance, and they will work as something that could be a standalone ordinance. So you can take these ideas and incorporate them into your existing performance standard framework, or they could live as a separate standalone ordinance. So how you customize these and how you actually adopt them will depend on your current framework. But I think one of the things that we wanted to do as we put these, actual model ordinances out there is have these annotations, what we call the planning considerations. These are the notes underneath that talk about each section, and they talk about specific sections a little bit more. So it can help provide a little more editorial context around what you might consider, or in certain situations you want to emphasize. The analog for this kind of comes from, if you think of the model shoreline zoning, chapter 1000, or chapter 1000 that's out there. There's notes all through that. So we wanted to kind of do the same thing so that you would have a little bit of context before picking up the phone and calling someone like Tom or Cy to get some more details. Next, please. And at a high level, I encourage you all to get the handbook and kind of dive into it. But at a high level, we're proposing, putting out their solar energy systems as an ordinance and battery energy storage as an ordinance, rather than a single ordinance, because there are enough differences between these uses and the size of these uses and the implications for a number of different review criteria that kind of warrants their own treatment. So the structure for both of these is going to look the same as far as how it's laid out, and you can kind of see the table of contents version on your screen. And you will note that this is going to be looking like a standalone ordinance. It has its own administration section, it has its own definitions and review authority, so that you could adopt this as a standalone ordinance. Like I said, if you wanted to roll this into an existing zoning or land use ordinance, you would not need to readopt and the administration section. You would simply just slide those definitions into your existing definition section. But we wanted to at least present it as something that a community could look at, customize, and adopt as a relatively standalone ordinance in their code of ordinances. So again, what you see on the slide, these first three sections are really kind of the administration and enforcement kind of sections. And the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about the review itself. What do you need to submit to the planning board if you're the applicant to do a complete review? And, kind of flipping that question around, what does the board need to see in order to make an informed decision about the impacts of a particular proposal? And once you know what you need to submit and what you're going to be reviewing, section 500 is really, what are the thresholds? What are the standards you need to meet in order to get an approval? So that's where you'll find, where the board is making those kind of yes and no and meets or does not meets decisions based on what's in section 500 here. And this again is for the solar energy systems. And if we kind of skip ahead, same kind of structure for battery energy storage. And you'll see that reflected on the next slide as well. I think it would be interesting, maybe when we get to the Q&A, to talk a little bit more about the differences between these. Solar farms can be much larger, dozens and hundreds of acres in size. They are going to have very different land use implications than battery energy storage systems, which are going to be up to an acre or several acres in size and not dozens of acres in size. And they're often going to want to be near substations or transmission lines where they can build their own substation. And that's also likely, and I think where we've been seeing them more often is kind of in an existing industrial area. Um, the one in Gorham is in their industrial park. So it's kind of surrounded by other industrial uses. And so thinking about those things, the size, the implications, the land use considerations, that's the interesting part of the model ordinance, I think, is kind of like we can look at the structure of it, but then digging into the specific standards is kind of the next step. Next slide, please. So thinking about what to address and how to address it is really like at the policy and ordinance stage. Um, it's probably too late to have those kinds of conversations at the project review stage where you've got a project in front of the board and the planning board is saying, we're supposed to be judging this at this point against some standards. We're not here to decide if it's the right thing for our town or not. And trying to like separate those two types of conversations is going to be helpful. And it is the kind of thing that is much easier to have that policy and ordinance discussion early, not in the context of an active application. That doesn't always happen. Towns don't always have that luxury, but to the extent that you're able to address this early and start thinking about these and putting the rules in place so that when a project does come, you don't need to have that higher level conversation about, is this right for us? Is this in the right place? You've already made some of those decisions. Next, please. So I would be happy. I won't speak over Cy too much, but I think this is the point in the session where we're hoping to have some questions. Happy to dig a little deeper into the handbook specifics, but interested again, maybe you want to share some of your experiences with either of these kinds of uses. That would be interesting for me to hear. I'll turn it back over to Tom or Cy.
Yeah, real quickly, Tom, I think just to leave this up on the screen for another minute or two to allow folks to scan the QR code, and also feel free to take down my email. I think we're really interested to hear feedback or to get questions. And I think, as Ben noted, we see this resource as somewhat of a funnel, and I think we recognize that the needs and priorities of communities across the state are going to be at times very disparate, and so I think we wanted to start with the narrative section, presenting some of the background on the technologies and providing some answers to frequently asked questions to help start to build the capacity so that communities can think and understand these technologies and recognize what kind of their priorities are related to them, and then slowly start to narrow that funnel and provide resources in a planning context to kind of put that into practice. I think and that's reflected in the ordinance language too, and kind of throughout the handbook. It's not meant to be a ordinance that you can pick up and adopt without editing at all. It's really a framework that then allows communities to kind of put their own touch on it to prioritize what their needs are within the community with some of that background information that the rest of the handbook provided them with. So that's really our goal with it. And like Ben said, I think we're really interested both to hear questions maybe about specific choices or inclusions that we made within the handbook, or really just general feedback or projects or kind of examples, like Ben said, of these technologies within your own communities. And so again, thank you, Tom. Thank you everyone for being here, and I'll stop sharing and pass it back over to you.
Yeah, and those of you that didn't catch that QR code, you can get to it from my first link that I posted today. Questions. There was one comment in chat about this was just specifically about Ellsworth, a moratorium on medium and large scale solar energy systems in 2022. They passed that. So I guess like moratoriums in general. So it's typical. John, I see your hand. 1 second. So it's typical for we'll just get to this question from Danielle. So this typical for a town, what I saw a decade ago was we would get one solar project in a town, and then a town would sort of react. And I don't think we're pretty well past that. Towns know what's going on, and they've probably already reacted if they want to. Um, but some of the towns, and this is probably right around the same time frame where I was thinking, but where they did do these moratoriums, are we seeing moratoriums drop off ever? I guess is sort of, I mean, this is just it's not something that we look into our program. Is there still a demand for moratoriums? Because that's what I'm still seeing demand for moratoriums from phone calls. Um, I mean, this is going along with the towns that want same here. Hope from EMDC. Um, I mean, this is guidance, so it's guidance that we strongly encourage. And a lot of times when towns talk about these moratoriums, one thing I'll usually bring up that sometimes planning board members don't think about is, I know I didn't when I went through this in my town, but is the um, property taxes that these places pay. It is very substantial. It actually kind of blew me away in a way. And so some of these small towns, they're some of the highest taxpayers in the town, and they're not sending kids to school. Um, so that's a conversation I usually have around that. Okay, I'm done ranting. John, you had a question?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I'll admit I don't know. I'm not very familiar with the handbook yet. But I have a question that may be covered there, and so I apologize for that. But yeah, and it's sort of related to kind of land use, not so much the technicalities of the systems themselves. But I'm curious to know what kind of conversations or feedback is being had around site selection, particularly related to habitat, soils, brownfields, things like that. Like I assume if there's a brownfield, it's in some ways maybe an easy target. Like, oh yeah, this is a great use for this land, but on the flip side, maybe where there's a place that does have designated, prime soils for prime forest land, prime farm agriculture land. I'm curious to know what kind of, like what that conversation's been like.
And Ben, feel free to kind of augment this. I think Ben talked about in the first part of the handbook, we talk about what developers are looking for in site selection, and then I think one part right after that, right after we talk about what developers look for, we go into a brief section that covers how to think about solar and storage and agricultural land and brownfield land and some of what might be places where communities might have either some inclination to prioritize or disincentivize development in specific areas, and how to encounter those needs in conjunction with what the developers are looking for. So we kind of include that briefly. And then we worked with folks from DEP and DACF to think about some of the existing definitions around soils and habitat land, and then how those intersect with solar and storage development as well. And then my last point here is kind of we also I think generally we within the handbook encourage folks definitely where there are brownfields or sites that can have some productive reuse to think about those first in terms of siting, but then also recognizing the kind of needs and requirements of a lot of the larger systems being close to transmission or substations is not always it's not always super congruent with where those sites are.
Right. Thanks for that summary. I just will, yeah, like the caveat here, or not an anecdote, is that I live in South Portland, not far from that solar array that was shown, and I believe it is built on a landfill. So we're kind of, I think we probably check a lot of those boxes that you mentioned, Sad. But yeah, thanks for that.
David.
I have a question. In California, about 5 years ago, I worked on a pretty large solar and BESS project, and one of the comments that we got a lot of from people that were opposed to the project was, "Why are we doing this at all? Let's just focus on incentivizing rooftop solar as much as we can, then we don't have to worry about this stuff." Is there anything in the handbook that compares the generative capacity of utility scale solar versus rooftop solar in case people try to make those same arguments here?
That's a really good note, and not actually one that I think we cover precisely with that. We do direct folks. So on the Department of Energy Resources website, we have a solar dashboard, and there are some charts that show solar development within the state, and you can filter by kind of size of or type of development. So looking at utility versus distributed DG projects. And so that's kind of one way to think about that distinction. It's not something we did exactly within the framework of this handbook, because I think as Ben mentioned, we were really wanting to focus on particularly those larger projects, given some of the specific land use considerations associated with them. But I think that is useful feedback and something that I will take back to our team to see if we can dig up a good answer to and put that on our solar page.
Thank you.
Jim, you took your hand down.
Well, I had it up and down. No, we have we've been involved in the Energy Transition Initiative Partnership Project with Stonington. So could have dozens of questions there, but I'll focus on one that I don't recall, having only skimmed your handbook. How do you deal with the possible creative combined use of solar with grazing or solar with agriculture, those kinds of incentives that I think MOFGA's addressed to some extent, but that seems like a win-win solution. In Sedgwick, we have a pretty large scale solar farm that just replaced blueberries. And that was kind of a shame. And I wonder if they could have designed it differently so they could have kept some agricultural use there. And do you have ideas for incentives for doing that?
I think reference kind of dual use agrivoltaics within the handbook and point to a couple of successful example projects. We also, I think, in the handbook primarily defer to a lot of the guidance that DACF has developed around this subject. And I would potentially, I'm curious also to hear thoughts from folks on this call around ways that I think those projects could be incentivized. It is something that we talk about as you think about where your community wants these projects to consider the intersection with ag, but yeah, given the experience that folks on this call have with citing projects and land use considerations, I think we're very open to think about how to forward that kind of intersection, because we see it, like you said, as a potential win-win as well, and that's how we characterize it within the handbook.
And I'll just chime in very briefly that I think there's a lot of other resources that are out there too. You mentioned one, Jim, but Maine Audubon has done a lot of through a separate effort, the separate handbook and separate guidance around habitat protection and tree clearing. And they talk a lot about like how to prioritize, putting these things on landfills, as David said, or how to utilize underutilized brownfields. I think that this handbook fits into that overall ecosystem of guidance, in that we're trying to focus. We didn't want to recreate those things, but we're really trying to provide a reference to the communities. It's like, okay, we know we need to be thinking about these systems at a local level, where and how, those kinds of things. I think that the kind of incentives that people are talking about, I think more can be done, frankly, at a state level when it comes to thinking about an overarching system of compatibility with agriculture, multi-use kind of situations, but it is going to be part of each community's conversation to say, this is a great way to support working farms on one hand. On the other hand, like, we don't want to lose tillable land to these kinds of land uses. So I think those are the kinds of things that we've recognized people in every community are going to have to balance and go through. And the Deer Isle context is probably going to be a little bit of a different conversation than the South Portland conversation, but those issues are going to be relevant, and each town's going to have to like find their path, I think, and the right balance for them.
Okay. Granier? You're muted.
Hi.
There you go.
Just to kind of piggyback on what Jim just said, the Maine Farmland Trust is a really, really good guide on balancing solar and farmland, if you're not familiar with it. And I think they looked into the blueberry and solar combo and found that it did not work very well, just because of the blueberries' sun requirements. My question, I guess, to you folks would be, is there any concern about the repercussions of LD 2174? And I understand that was voted ought not to pass, but where that was, I'm wondering if that is going to spur more communities to enact more restrictive regulations or pass moratoria because of the concern that if we don't do it, the state will.
I think my best answer here will be, just given that I think we're still trying to figure out what the implications of that legislation might be, and so I will probably try to coordinate a response from some folks on my team, and then get an answer back to you there. But I think that's a really interesting question, and I think one that, again, we would be interested in hearing your thoughts there as well, given potentially some feedback that you've gotten from the communities within your jurisdiction.
And I think, because it's come up a couple of times, I'll mention that a moratorium can be used. It can be a very useful tool for communities who need to create some space and some time to craft regulations. They're temporary, and they're meant to only be, they should only rightly be used during a policy conversation and an ordinance drafting process. The result of which may be, there are places in town where these are not appropriate, or they're only appropriate under certain circumstances. But there shouldn't be like a 5-year-old moratorium anywhere, because the purpose is really just a pause. It's like a timeout. I often describe planning as trying to change the wheels on the bus while the bus is going down the road, but a moratorium will stop the bus. It gives the town time to address whatever the policy concern is. So if towns are going to use those for the purposes of solar and battery energy storage in particular, I recommend that you do that with the handbook in hand, because there is a timer on those moratoria, and you should be making diligent progress on it. But hopefully, your community is in a place where you don't necessarily, you can have these conversations before the need for a moratorium comes up.
Okay, thank you. Linda.
Hi, thank you. The information sounds great, and I have to admit I have not read over the whole handbook yet. But my question is on enforcement at a state and federal level. So are there any inspections that are being done during construction? And also, once a project is up and running and the applicant doesn't meet any of their conditions or such, what kind of enforcement action is taken? I can't imagine that a solar energy system is going to get shut down. What are the steps, and what's the enforcement from a state and federal side?
We do talk about that a little bit. By and large, for solar in particular, the state and federal process is really happening at the permitting stage, at the very like design and permitting. And once it's up and running, there really aren't going to be issues unless there's complaints. Like the Army Corps of Engineers does not have a solar inspector going around and looking at these and checking people's fences and stormwater systems, if that's what your question was, Linda. It would be up to the town to kind of monitor, or, if there's complaints from neighbors, that would get escalated to the relevant authority. I guess that's the short answer to the question is, a lot of that happens during permitting, and it's up to the applicant to make sure that they're staying compliant, or otherwise, they could be on the hook for enforcement. But there's not a lot of, as long as it's been built as designed, there's not a lot of like operational issues that would typically come up during a 20-year, 30-year lifespan of a solar farm, for example.
I will also say I think I agree completely with the characterization that solar and battery energy storage projects, typically everything is very much front loaded. And Ben, correct me if I'm wrong, but something we talk about a bit within the planning considerations and kind of ordinance section is requiring at least some kind of maintenance and operation schedule to be submitted in the planning stage at the local level. And so this isn't at a state or federal level, but there are some inclusions around that kind of schedule. And then also that's a big focus of the kind of the decommissioning section. And I think what Ben did note is that we encourage for projects that kind of meet DEP site plan review and decommissioning thresholds for communities to defer to that. But I think we also introduce that for larger projects that might fall between that 1 and 3 megawatt size, or or 1 to 3 acre size, and don't meet DEP requirements but are still larger projects, we include some decommissioning language for communities to kind of think about projects that might be in that kind of mid-tier size.
I have one, and I know we're going a little bit over what I said we're gonna go over. And this is the only thing that caught me up when I first saw this a few weeks ago. Was around accessory use, and I just sort of like, how would a town approach that? How could a town get duped by it or something? Accessory use in your handbook, I started on page 37. It references a statute that's the permit by right statute. But I didn't see and there's probably a reason for it, but I didn't see like a guidance on what accessory really means, or like a sample definition or something. Was that intentional, or am I missing something? Or is it just sort of up to each town? They have the discussion, they can say 1 megawatt or less is accessory. I mean, I'm picturing the old retired farmer that's not working his land anymore, and it's still a farm, but they have 50 acres of solar or something, right? Very common. That's accessory. I would call it accessory, at first glance, but was there any thoughts on that, or am I missing something?
It's a good question, and I can't cite a specific page. I'd have to look it up to see where we break that down. But it's essentially what we're trying to do is make a differentiation between accessory uses, which are secondary and incidental to the principal use, and a principal use, which is the main use of the property. So we had some discussions, Cy and I and folks on the team, about, hey, the Tesla battery wall in someone's basement, clearly accessory. What about the 2 acres of roof panels on top of the, LL Bean distribution facility? or, you know, the 12 acres that support a very large dairy operation. And it really isn't about the size. As if it's supporting a big industrial use or a big dairy operation, for example, it could still be a very large accessory use. If it's the only thing happening on that property, that would be the principal use. So we do talk about that in the, I'm sure we talk about it in the model ordinance section. I see the page you're talking about. But maybe that's something to clarify a little bit for the second edition of this thing at some point.
Yeah, and it's fine. And it can be up to each town. Hopefully they would catch that. There's a comment here from Megan Lamb. Newer DACF rules for solar on high value ag. And so not being caught up on things, I assume the term, I wrote that down too, high value ag that you mentioned. That's the term that replaces the old farmland of statewide significance, I assume, and prime farmland, right? Is that's an actual term, right? High value ag.
Yes, yeah, and
Okay.
we have a brief breakdown. My understanding is that they are all still relevant terms with slightly different exact distinctions.
Okay. Questions? Looks like we went a little over, and I see no hands up. At the beginning of this chat were links to obviously the handbook and to Ben Smith's site and where this video will be posted. If there's nothing else, reminder, our next webinar will be Friday, April 3rd. Please send us any suggestions for future topics. Thank you to Cy and Ben. This has been great. Opened my eyes a bit. And if there's nothing else, everyone can have a great weekend, and we'll see you in April. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thank you.